For 30 days, a billionaire CEO disguised himself as a janitor in his own company. What he discovered in those utility closets and empty hallways would expose the darkest corners of human nature and destroy the careers of those who thought no one important was watching. This is the true story of a father's dying wish, a son's ultimate test of courage, and the moment when invisible became unforgettable. This is the janitor's secret. Stay until the very end, because what happens in that boardroom will leave you speechless. They thought he was just another janitor, someone to ignore, someone to mock, someone to look down upon. But when this man in worn coveralls walked into that boardroom and slowly removed his cap, every single person in that office felt their world shift beneath their feet. Because what happened next would expose the darkest secrets of human nature and change not just one company, but the lives of everyone who witnessed it. This is the story of a father's promise, a son's mission, and why you should never, ever judge someone by their uniform. Stay until the very end, because the final twist will leave you speechless. 23 years ago, in a small hospital room on the outskirts of Chicago, an elderly man lay dying. His hands were rough and calloused from decades of mopping floors, scrubbing toilets, and cleaning up after others. His fingernails bore the permanent stains of industrial cleaning chemicals, and his back was bent from years of bending over mop buckets and reaching into corners that others pretended didn't exist. His name was Frank Greystone, and he had built an empire that no one knew belonged to him. The irony was almost too perfect to believe. Here was a man who had started with nothing, absolutely nothing, and through sheer determination, intelligence, and an understanding of human nature that came from being invisible for most of his life, he had built Greystone Enterprises into a multi-million-dollar corporation. But nobody knew. Not his employees, not his competitors, not even some members of his own board of directors. They all believed that Frank Greystone, the CEO, was a different person entirely from Frank the janitor who had cleaned their offices for decades. You see, Frank had discovered something profound about human beings during his years of invisibility. People reveal their true selves when they think nobody important is watching. When they believe the person cleaning their office can't affect their career, their reputation, or their future, they drop their masks. They show you who they really are underneath all the pretense and political correctness and carefully constructed professional personas. Frank had watched executives cheat on their wives, steal from the company, lie to clients, and abuse their employees, all while he quietly emptied their trash cans and wiped down their desks. He had seen the same executives give inspiring speeches about integrity and teamwork, just hours after they had screamed at their assistants or falsified expense reports. He knew which managers were genuine leaders and which ones were just bullies with fancy titles. He knew which employees worked late because they cared about the company and which ones stayed late just to be seen staying late. And all of this knowledge, all of these insights into the human condition, he had gained while wearing a janitor's uniform and being treated like he was invisible. Like he didn't matter, like he wasn't even human. Now, as his son Daniel sat beside his hospital bed, Frank was preparing to pass on not just his company, but the wisdom that had built it. Daniel was 32 years old, Harvard educated, and everything you would expect from the heir to a business empire. He wore expensive suits, drove a luxury car, and had spent the last 8 years learning the business from the ground up, though he had done so from boardrooms and corner offices, not from utility closets and maintenance rooms. "Dad," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "Why didn't you ever tell them? Why did you let them treat you like that all those years? You owned the company. You could have commanded respect, demanded it." Frank's eyes, clouded with age and illness but still sharp with intelligence, focused on his son. Daniel, my boy, I want you to understand something that they don't teach you in business school. Something that you can't learn from quarterly reports or strategic planning sessions. The most powerful position in any organization is the one where people think you don't matter. When someone believes you have no power, no influence, no importance, that's when they show you their true face. That's when you learn who they really are. He paused, gathering strength for what he knew would be one of the most important conversations of his life. I learned more about people, about leadership, about human nature, from that janitor's uniform than I ever could have learned from a corner office. I saw the executives who would step over homeless people on their way to charity galas. I watched managers who preached teamwork while sabotaging their own colleagues. I witnessed the small cruelties and large betrayals that happen every day in corporate America when people think nobody important is watching. Daniel leaned closer, hanging on every word. He had always known his father was wise, but this was different. This was wisdom earned through decades of deliberate humility, of choosing to be underestimated, of weaponizing invisibility. But I also saw the good ones, Frank continued, a slight smile crossing his weathered face. The executives who said please and thank you to the cleaning staff. The managers who remembered the names of the security guards and asked about their families. The employees who stayed late to help a colleague in trouble, not for recognition or advancement, but simply because it was the right thing to do. Those were the people I promoted. Those were the people I built this company around. Frank's breathing became more labored, but his voice grew stronger with passion. Daniel, when you take over this company, and you will take it over sooner than either of us would like, I need you to promise me something. Promise me that you'll never forget where we came from. Promise me that you'll never lose sight of the fact that our company is made up of human beings, not just profit margins and productivity metrics. I promise, Dad. Of course I promise. No, son, I need more than that. I need you to promise me that someday, when the company needs it most, when you start to wonder if we've lost our way, when the reports on your desk tell you that something is wrong with our culture but you can't quite put your finger on what it is, I need you to promise me that you'll do what I did. You'll put on that uniform, you'll walk in those shoes, and you'll see who people really are when they think no one important is watching. Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. The idea of disguising himself as a janitor, of deliberately making himself invisible, of subjecting himself to the kind of treatment he had watched his father endure for so many years. It was both terrifying and intriguing. Dad, I don't know if I could do what you did. I don't know if I have that kind of strength. Frank reached out with his trembling hand and grasped his son's wrist. You have more strength than you know, Daniel. But strength isn't about never falling down. Strength is about getting back up, even when people are stepping on you while you're down. Strength is about maintaining your dignity when others are trying to strip it away. Strength is about remembering that every person, no matter what uniform they wear, no matter what job they do, deserves to be treated with basic human decency. The old man's eyes began to close, but his grip on his son's wrist remained firm. Promise me, Daniel. Promise me that when the time comes, you'll have the courage to become invisible, because that's when you'll truly learn how to lead. I promise, Dad. I promise. 3 days later, Frank Greystone passed away peacefully in his sleep, leaving behind a company, a legacy, and a son who would carry the weight of that promise for the next 23 years. Daniel did his best to honor his father's memory and his father's values, but running a large corporation from the C-suite is different from observing it from the maintenance closet. For 23 years, Daniel led Greystone Enterprises with integrity and compassion, or at least he believed he did. The company grew, profits increased, and employee satisfaction surveys generally showed positive results. But there were always whispers, always complaints, always resignations that cited cultural issues and hostile work environment as reasons for leaving. Daniel would investigate these complaints, of course. He would call meetings, send out surveys, hire consultants to assess company culture. But somehow, the problems persisted. Good employees kept leaving. Talented people kept citing management issues as their reason for departure. And Daniel began to wonder if he was seeing the same sanitized version of his company that everyone wanted him to see, rather than the truth of what was actually happening on the ground level. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in September. Daniel was sitting in his corner office on the 40th floor, looking out at the city below, when his assistant brought him a stack of resignation letters. 7 people in 1 week. 7 good employees, citing the same vague complaints about management and workplace culture. As Daniel read through the letters, one phrase kept appearing over and over again. Toxic management, lack of respect for employees, feeling devalued and unheard. But when he asked HR for specifics, when he demanded names and details, somehow everything became vague and diplomatic. It's just a general culture issue, Mr. Greystone. Nothing we can pinpoint to any specific individual or incident. That evening, Daniel sat alone in his father's old study, looking at the framed black and white photograph of Frank in his janitor's uniform, standing in the lobby of Greystone Enterprises 40 years ago. The image was creased at the corners from decades in its frame, the edges slightly yellowed with age. His father's weathered hands gripped a mop, but his eyes held the quiet dignity that had built an empire in secret. The weight of his promise, postponed for more than 2 decades, finally settled on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. "Dad," he whispered to the photograph, "I think it's time." The decision hung in the air like the calm before a storm. Everything was about to change. He picked up the phone and called his most trusted assistant. "Cancel all my meetings for the next month. Tell everyone I'm taking an extended personal leave. And I need you to do something that's going to sound very strange. I need you to get me a janitor's uniform, size large, and I need you to register me with the temp agency we use for maintenance staff. The name is Danny Greystone, and I need to be assigned to our own building." His assistant, loyal and discreet after 15 years of service, asked no questions. She simply said, "Consider it done, Mr. Greystone." At 5 o'clock the next morning, Daniel stood in front of his bathroom mirror, looking at a man he barely recognized. The stiff fabric of the blue coveralls scratched against his skin, carrying the faint chemical smell of industrial detergent. Gone was the $3,000 Armani suit, the Swiss watch, the Italian leather shoes. The work boots felt heavier than he remembered from trying them on, their weight a constant reminder of the ground-level reality he was about to enter. But more than the clothes had changed. He had practiced changing his posture, slouching his shoulders, speaking in a rougher voice with a slight accent that suggested a working-class background. As he looked at his reflection, something unexpected happened. He saw his father staring back at him. Not just the physical resemblance, which had always been strong, but something deeper. He saw the same quiet dignity, the same patient observation, the same willingness to be underestimated in order to learn the truth. "I won't let you down, Dad," he whispered to his reflection. At 6:30 that morning, Danny Greystone reported for his first day of work as a janitor at Greystone Enterprises. The irony was not lost on him that he was about to be paid minimum wage to clean the building that he owned, to empty the trash cans of executives who earned their salaries from the profits he generated, to scrub the toilets used by people who would fire him without a second thought if they knew who he really was. The morning shift supervisor, a tired-looking woman named Betty, who had been with the company for 15 years, handed him a cart full of cleaning supplies and a list of assignments. "You'll be covering floors 15 through 25, she said without looking up from her clipboard. Bathrooms, offices, break rooms, conference rooms, standard stuff. Try to stay invisible and don't bother the employees. They don't like to be reminded that we exist. Danny nodded and pushed his cart toward the elevator, noting Betty's casual acceptance of their invisibility, the matter-of-fact way she spoke about being ignored and devalued. This was his first lesson. The cleaning staff had internalized their status as non-people, and they expected nothing more than to be overlooked and dismissed. As the elevator rose toward the 15th floor, Daniel's heart pounded with a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. He was about to see his company, his life's work, his father's legacy, through completely different eyes. He was about to discover whether the values he thought he had instilled, the culture he believed he had created, actually existed, or if they were just comfortable illusions. The elevator doors opened onto the 15th floor, and Daniel's transformation from CEO to janitor was complete. He was now Danny, a middle-aged man in coveralls, pushing a cart full of cleaning supplies, invisible to everyone who mattered, and visible only to those who might need his services. His first stop was the break room, where he began emptying trash cans and wiping down tables. Within minutes, employees began filtering in for their morning coffee, and Daniel got his first taste of life as a non-person. They walked around him as if he were a piece of furniture. They reached across him without saying, "Excuse me." They dropped trash on the floor he had just cleaned without acknowledgement or apology. In their world, he simply didn't exist as a human being worthy of basic courtesy. But Daniel wasn't just observing their indifference. He was listening to their conversations, the unguarded discussions that people have when they believe only their peers are present. He heard complaints about management, gossip about colleagues, and casual cruelties that would never be spoken in mixed company. He began to understand that his company, the organization he had spent decades trying to build on principles of respect and integrity, had developed its own underground culture of cynicism and disrespect. "Did you see Thompson's email yesterday?" one employee was saying to another as they fixed their coffee. "The way he talked to the Chen girl? I mean, I know she screwed up, but Jesus, you don't talk to people like that." "Thompson's been getting worse lately," the second employee replied. "Ever since his divorce started, he's been taking it out on everyone, especially the younger staff. I heard he made Jessica from accounting cry last week. Someone should report him to HR." "Yeah, right. HR protects management, not us. You know that." Daniel made note of the name Thompson and continued his work, filing away every piece of information, every casual revelation about the real culture of his company. This was exactly what his father had warned him about: the difference between what executives believed was happening and what was actually happening. As he moved through the building, floor by floor, office by office, Daniel began to see patterns emerge. There were the employees who treated him with basic human decency, saying good morning, thanking him for emptying their trash, apologizing when they accidentally got in his way. And there were the employees who treated him as if he were invisible at best and an inconvenience at worst. On the 18th floor, he encountered Sarah Chen, the young woman he had heard mentioned in the break room conversation. She was working late, hunched over her computer, surrounded by stacks of papers and empty coffee cups. As Daniel began to empty her trash can, she looked up and smiled. "Oh, I'm sorry. Am I in your way?" she asked, starting to move her chair. "No, miss, you're fine. I can work around you." "Are you new? I don't think I've seen you before." "First week," Daniel replied, touched by her genuine interest in him as a person. "Well, welcome to Greystone. I'm Sarah." She extended her hand, treating him with the same courtesy she would show to any new colleague. "Danny," he replied, shaking her hand and noting the firmness of her grip, the directness of her gaze. "Nice to meet you, Danny. If you need anything, or if you have any questions about the building, just let me know. I've been here for 3 years, so I know where everything is." "Thank you, miss. That's very kind of you." As Daniel continued his work, he found himself thinking about Sarah Chen. In a building full of people who treated him as invisible, she had taken the time to welcome him, to offer help, to treat him as a fellow human being. This was the kind of employee his father would have noticed, the kind of person who revealed good character when she thought no one important was watching. But if Sarah represented the best of his company's culture, Richard Thompson represented something much darker. Daniel encountered Thompson on the 20th floor, in a conference room where Thompson was conducting what appeared to be a disciplinary meeting with a junior employee. "I don't want to hear excuses," Thompson was saying, his voice loud enough to be heard through the glass walls. "Results are what matter. If you can't handle the pressure of this job, maybe you should consider a career change." The junior employee, a young man who couldn't have been more than 25, was red-faced and clearly struggling not to cry. "Sir, I understand, but the client changed their requirements at the last minute, and I was trying to accommodate. The client is always right. That's business 101. If you can't adapt to changing requirements, then you don't belong in this industry." Daniel began cleaning the conference room next door, but he could hear every word of Thompson's verbal assault. This wasn't coaching or constructive criticism. This was humiliation, designed to break down the employee's confidence and assert Thompson's dominance. As the meeting ended and the junior employee left, clearly devastated, Thompson noticed Daniel cleaning nearby. "You," Thompson said, snapping his fingers. "New guy." Daniel looked up, making his expression neutral and subservient. "Yes, sir." "This conference room needs to be perfect in an hour. We have the Hartwell presentation and everything has to be spotless. Can you handle that, or do I need to get someone competent?" The casual insult, delivered with the assumption that Daniel was incompetent simply because of his uniform, was like a slap in the face. But Daniel had promised his father he would learn, and this was part of the learning process. "I'll take care of it right away, sir." "Good. And make sure those windows are streak-free. The last janitor left them looking like garbage." As Thompson walked away, Daniel felt a surge of anger, unlike anything he had experienced in years. This man, this middle manager who owed his job and his salary to the company Daniel had built, was treating him with contempt and cruelty simply because he wore a janitor's uniform. The irony was almost overwhelming. Thompson was insulting and dismissing the very person who signed his paychecks, and he was doing it with the casual arrogance of someone who believed his position gave him the right to dehumanize others. But Daniel's anger was tempered by a growing understanding of what his father had tried to teach him. This wasn't about him personally. This was about power, about hierarchy, about the way people treat those they perceive as powerless. Thompson's cruelty wasn't directed at Daniel Greystone, the CEO. It was directed at Danny the janitor, a person Thompson saw as beneath his notice and unworthy of basic respect. Over the following days, Daniel continued his undercover observations, and a disturbing picture began to emerge. Thompson wasn't an isolated case. There was an entire culture of casual cruelty that permeated certain levels of the organization. Managers who screamed at their subordinates behind closed doors but smiled and glad-handed at company meetings. Executives who made jokes about the cleaning staff and security guards, treating them as objects of amusement rather than fellow human beings. But Daniel also discovered pockets of genuine decency and leadership. There was Maria Gonzalez in accounting, who always said please and thank you, who asked about his family and remembered details about his life that he shared with her. There was Dr. James Wilson, the company physician who treated everyone from the CEO to the janitor with the same professional courtesy and genuine concern for their well-being. And there was Sarah Chen, who had become a bright spot in Daniel's daily routine. Every morning when he cleaned her area, she would greet him warmly, ask how he was doing, and sometimes even engage him in brief conversations about current events or local news. She treated him like a human being, not like a piece of equipment. It was during one of these conversations that Daniel learned more about Sarah's background and character. She was telling him about her weekend plans to visit her mother's grave, and Daniel listened with growing respect and admiration. "My mom passed away 2 years ago," Sarah was explaining as Daniel wiped down her desk. "She was a housekeeper for most of her life, worked 3 jobs to put me through college. She always told me that dignity isn't about what you do for a living. It's about how you treat other people and how you carry yourself." Daniel paused in his cleaning, struck by the wisdom and grace in her words. "Your mother sounds like she was a remarkable woman." "She was. She taught me that everyone deserves respect, regardless of their job or their circumstances. She used to say that you can judge a person's character by how they treat people who can't do anything for them in return." The profundity of Sarah's statement hit Daniel like a thunderbolt. Here was the principle his father had tried to teach him, articulated perfectly by a young woman who had learned it from her housekeeper mother. The true measure of character isn't how you treat your superiors or your peers. It's how you treat the people who society has deemed invisible and unimportant. As the days passed, Daniel's notebook filled with observations about his employees, his company culture, and the complex ecosystem of power and respect that existed within the organization. He began to see that the problems weren't random or isolated. They stemmed from a small group of toxic managers who had created a culture of fear and disrespect that rippled throughout their departments. The worst of these was undoubtedly Richard Thompson. Daniel had been documenting Thompson's behavior for weeks, and what he discovered was beyond anything he had imagined. Thompson wasn't just rude and dismissive. He was actively cruel, using his position to humiliate and demoralize anyone he perceived as vulnerable. Daniel witnessed Thompson reducing a young intern to tears over a minor mistake. He heard Thompson making racist and sexist jokes when he thought only his cronies were listening. He watched Thompson take credit for his subordinates' work while throwing them under the bus when anything went wrong. But the incident that finally pushed Daniel to action happened on a Friday afternoon in late October. Daniel was cleaning the bathroom on Thompson's floor when he heard shouting coming from Thompson's office. He crept closer and listened as Thompson unleashed a torrent of verbal abuse on Sarah Chen. "Are you completely incompetent?" Thompson was screaming. "How do you lose an entire presentation? Do you have any idea how much the Hartwell account is worth to this company?" "Sir, my computer crashed and I lost the file," Sarah was saying, her voice shaking with stress and emotion. "I can recreate it, but I need a little more time." "Time? Time? The presentation is Monday morning. You've had weeks to prepare for this." "I know, sir. I'm so sorry. I'll work all weekend if I have to." "Working all weekend won't fix stupid, Chen. Maybe your mother should have taught you about competence instead of just being nice to janitors." The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel felt his blood pressure spike as he realized that Thompson had just used Sarah's deceased mother and her kindness toward the cleaning staff as weapons to hurt and humiliate her. "Don't," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. "Please don't bring my mother into this." "Your mother? The maid? Face it, Chen. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Maybe you're better suited for simpler work. Maybe you should be cleaning toilets instead of trying to do a job that requires actual intelligence." Daniel's knuckles went white as he gripped the mop handle. His father's face flashed before his eyes, the dignity of every person who had ever been dismissed because of their uniform. Enough was enough. That was the moment Daniel's restraint finally snapped. Before he could think about the consequences, before he could consider the implications for his undercover investigation, he found himself walking into Thompson's office. "That's enough," he said quietly, his voice carrying an authority that seemed to surprise everyone in the room, including himself. Thompson spun around, his face red with rage and surprise. "Excuse me?" Did the janitor just tell me what's enough? I said that's enough, Daniel repeated, stepping protectively closer to Sarah, who was wiping tears from her eyes. This young lady made a mistake. Her computer crashed. She's trying to fix it. But talking to her like that, bringing her deceased mother into it, using her kindness as a weapon against her, that's not leadership. That's just cruelty. Thompson's eyes widened in disbelief. Are you seriously giving me management advice? You clean toilets for a living. And what do you do for a living, sir? Daniel asked, his voice remaining calm but carrying an edge that made Thompson take a step back. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you make good people feel small, and that's the dirtiest job of all. The office had gone completely silent. Sarah was staring at Daniel with amazement and gratitude. Thompson was turning an even deeper shade of red, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. You're fired, Thompson finally managed to sputter. Security! I want this man escorted from the building immediately. We'll see about that, Daniel replied calmly. As security guards approached, Daniel noticed something interesting. They didn't immediately grab him and drag him away. Instead, they hesitated, looking uncomfortable with the situation. Tom, the head of security, was a man Daniel had interacted with several times during his weeks undercover. Tom had always treated him with respect and courtesy, and now he was clearly conflicted about removing someone who had just stood up to Thompson's bullying. Come on, Danny, Tom said quietly. Let's go have a chat in my office. As Daniel was led away, he heard Thompson continuing his tirade, but now his voice carried a note of uncertainty. Something about the janitor's confident response, his refusal to be intimidated, had shaken Thompson's usual arrogance. But as they walked toward Tom's office, Daniel could hear his father's voice echoing in his memory. Promise me that when the time comes, you'll have the courage to become invisible, because that's when you'll truly learn how to lead. The words felt prophetic now, as if his father had known this exact moment would come. In Tom's office, the security chief closed the door and turned to face Daniel with a puzzled expression. Danny, I've got to ask you something, and I need you to be straight with me. Who are you really? Daniel looked at Tom, a man who had shown him nothing but respect and kindness during his time undercover, and made a decision. Tom, I need you to promise me that what I'm about to tell you stays between us until Monday morning. Tom nodded slowly. My name isn't Danny. It's Daniel. Daniel Greystone. And I own this company. Tom's eyes widened, but after a moment of shock, he began to nod slowly. That explains a lot. The way you carry yourself, the way you talk, the way you stood up to Thompson. I knew there was something different about you. Tom, I need your help. Thompson has been terrorizing employees for months, maybe years. What I just witnessed in his office was the tip of the iceberg. I need to document everything, and I need to do it in a way that protects the victims and exposes the truth. Tom was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications of what Daniel was telling him. Finally, he spoke. Mr. Greystone, I've been working security for 30 years, and I've seen a lot of bad managers. But Thompson is something special. He's not just a bad boss, he's a predator. He finds people's vulnerabilities and he exploits them. He gets off on making people feel powerless. Then help me stop him. What do you need? Over the weekend, Daniel and Tom worked together to compile evidence of Thompson's misconduct. They reviewed security footage, gathered testimony from employees, and documented a pattern of behavior that went far beyond simple rudeness or poor management skills. But as they dug deeper, they uncovered something even more disturbing. Thompson wasn't just abusing his position to bully employees. He was actively sabotaging the company for personal gain. They found evidence of falsified reports, kickbacks from vendors, and most damning of all, recorded phone conversations in which Thompson discussed providing confidential company information to competitors in exchange for money. Thompson wasn't just a bully, he was a criminal. On Monday morning, Daniel sent an email to every employee in the company. The message was simple. There will be a mandatory meeting this morning at 10 o'clock in the main conference room. Attendance is required for all staff. Today, we're going to talk about the values that define our company and the behavior that we will and will not tolerate. Today, we're going to remember who we are and what we stand for. The email was signed simply, The Management. By 10 o'clock, the main conference room was packed. Employees filled every chair and lined the walls, buzzing with nervous energy and speculation. Thompson sat at the head of the table, trying to project his usual arrogance, but clearly unsettled by the mysterious meeting and the presence of security guards at every exit. "All right, let's get this over with," Thompson announced loudly. "I don't know who called this meeting, but I have real work to do. Where is whoever's in charge here?" "Right here," came a voice from the back of the room. Every head turned to see Danny the janitor standing in the doorway. But something was different about him. His posture was straighter, his presence more commanding. He walked to the front of the room with quiet confidence, carrying a manila folder and a framed photograph. A ripple of confused whispers spread through the crowd. "Is that the janitor?" someone murmured. "What's he doing here?" another voice asked nervously. Thompson's face contorted with rage and disbelief. "You've got to be kidding me. Security! Remove this man immediately. He was fired on Friday." But the security guards didn't move. They stood at attention, waiting. The tension in the room was palpable as employees craned their necks to see what was happening. Daniel reached the front of the room and turned to face the assembled employees. He placed the framed photograph on the podium where everyone could see it. It was a picture of his father, Frank, in his janitor's uniform, standing in the lobby of Greystone Enterprises 40 years ago. The room fell into an eerie silence as people tried to process what they were seeing. As Daniel stood there, preparing to reveal himself, his father's dying words echoed in his mind with startling clarity. "Promise me you'll have the courage to become invisible, because that's when you'll truly learn how to lead." This was the moment. This was what his father had prepared him for. "My name is not Danny," Daniel said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent room. "My name is Daniel Greystone, and I am the founder and CEO of this company." The gasp that filled the room was audible. It was as if the air had been sucked out of the space entirely. Phones clattered to desks as hands went limp with shock. Someone in the back of the room whispered, "Oh my God, it's really him." Another voice said, "The janitor is the CEO?" The murmurs grew louder as the reality began to sink in. Thompson's face went white, then red, then white again as the blood drained from his features. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, but no sound came out. Sarah, sitting in the third row, had tears streaming down her face, her hand covering her mouth in complete disbelief. Her eyes were wide with a mixture of shock, gratitude, and something that looked like recognition, as if pieces of a puzzle were suddenly falling into place in her mind. "For the past month," Daniel continued, "I have worked among you, not as your boss, not as an executive, but as my father once did, as a janitor. And what I discovered both broke my heart and opened my eyes." He gestured to his father's photograph. "My father, Frank Greystone, built this company from nothing. But before he was a CEO, he spent 40 years as a janitor. He understood something that I had forgotten, something that you can't learn in business school or boardroom meetings. He understood that to truly know an organization, to really understand its culture and values, You have to see it from the bottom up. You have to experience what it's like to be invisible, to be dismissed, to be treated as less than human. Daniel's voice grew stronger as he continued. On his deathbed, my father made me promise that if this company ever lost its way, if we ever forgot that our employees are human beings deserving of dignity and respect, I would do what he did. I would become invisible, and I would watch, and I would learn who we really are when we think no one important is looking. He opened the manila folder and pulled out a thick stack of documents. What I learned during my month undercover was both inspiring and horrifying. I met employees who embody the best of human nature. People who treat everyone with kindness and respect, regardless of their position or title. People who stay late to help colleagues, who go out of their way to make newcomers feel welcome, who understand that dignity and character are not determined by your job description. Daniel's gaze swept across the room, making eye contact with Sarah, with Maria, with Tom, with all the employees who had shown him kindness during his time in disguise. But I also discovered a cancer in our organization, a small group of managers who have created a culture of fear, intimidation, and cruelty. People who use their positions not to lead and inspire, but to bully and humiliate. Now his gaze fixed on Thompson, who was sweating profusely and looking around the room as if searching for an escape route. "Richard Thompson," Daniel said, his voice cold and clear. "You are fired, not just for your cruelty and harassment, not just for your systematic abuse of the people under your authority, but for corporate espionage, embezzlement, and sabotaging this company for personal financial gain." Thompson's survival instincts finally kicked in. His face twisted with desperate anger as he shot to his feet. "You can't do this to me," he shouted, pointing an accusing finger at Daniel. "This is entrapment. This is illegal. I'll have my lawyers all over this company. You think you can humiliate me in front of everyone and get away with it? I know things about this company, about you, that could destroy everything." The room watched in fascination and horror as Thompson's facade of corporate professionalism completely crumbled before their eyes. This was the real Richard Thompson, stripped of pretense, showing his true colors when cornered. "You're bluffing," Thompson continued, his voice rising to almost a shriek. "You have nothing on me. Nothing. This is all some elaborate setup, and when I'm done with you in court..." Daniel held up his hand calmly. "We have recordings, Richard. Phone conversations with our competitors, bank records showing payments to your offshore accounts, documentation of falsified reports and stolen company secrets. This isn't just about being a bad manager. This is about being a criminal." Thompson's face went ashen as the implications hit him. Two federal agents stepped forward from the crowd, having been positioned strategically among the employees. Thompson had been so focused on Daniel that he hadn't noticed them enter with the other staff members. "Richard Thompson," one of the agents said, producing handcuffs. "You are under arrest for corporate espionage, embezzlement, and wire fraud." As Thompson was read his rights and led away in handcuffs, his legs seemed to give out beneath him. The man who had terrorized so many employees was now the one who looked small and powerless. The room erupted in a mixture of emotions. Some employees sat in stunned silence. Others had quiet smiles of satisfaction spreading across their faces. Someone in the back whispered, "Finally." Another person softly said, "He got what he deserved." A few people began to clap, slowly at first, then building to genuine applause as justice was served before their eyes. The sound filled the conference room like thunder after lightning. Daniel turned back to the assembled employees. "But this isn't about Richard Thompson. This is about all of us. This is about the culture we create, the values we uphold, the way we treat each other when we think no one important is watching." He walked over to Sarah, who was sitting in the front row with tears streaming down her face. her hands trembling as she tried to process everything that was happening. "Sarah Chen," he said softly. "Please stand up." Sarah stood on shaking legs, still unable to fully process what was happening. Her colleagues around her were watching with rapt attention, many of them smiling through their own tears as they realized something beautiful was about to happen to someone who truly deserved it. 3 weeks ago, when I was just Danny the janitor with a broken cart, you stopped what you were doing to help me fix it. You didn't know who I was. You had no reason to think I could ever help you in return. But you helped me anyway, because that's who you are. Sarah's tears were flowing freely now, and she could barely stand as the emotion overwhelmed her. Several of her colleagues reached out to steady her, their faces filled with joy and anticipation. Daniel's voice grew stronger, but also more tender. "You treated me with kindness and respect when others treated me as invisible. You shared stories about your mother and the values she taught you. You showed me what real leadership looks like, not because of your title or position, but because of your character." Sarah's voice broke as she whispered, "Mr. Greystone, I can't believe." "Your mother would be so proud of you right now," Daniel said gently, and at those words, Sarah's composure completely broke. She sobbed openly, her hands covering her face, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the moment and the mention of the woman who had shaped her values. The room was completely silent, except for the sound of Sarah's emotional tears and the quiet sniffling of other employees who were moved by the scene unfolding before them. Daniel paused, allowing her a moment to collect herself, then continued. "Sarah, I'm promoting you to Vice President of Human Resources. It's time we had someone in leadership who understands that every person in this organization, from the CEO to the janitor, deserves to be treated with dignity." The room erupted in applause, genuine, heartfelt applause that started with a few people and quickly spread throughout the entire conference room. The sound was deafening, overwhelming, beautiful. People were cheering, some were crying, others were hugging each other in celebration. Maria from accounting had tears streaming down her face as she clapped enthusiastically. Tom, the security guard, was beaming with pride. Someone shouted, "Yes!" from the back of the room. Sarah could barely speak through her tears, her voice breaking with emotion. "Mr. Greystone, I don't know what to say. I don't know if I'm qualified for such an important position." A colleague beside her reached over and squeezed her shoulder supportively. Another whispered, "You deserve this, Sarah. You deserve all of this. Say you'll help me rebuild this company the way my father envisioned it," Daniel replied, his own voice thick with emotion. "Say you'll help me create a culture where character matters more than title, where kindness is valued as much as productivity, where no one is invisible. Your mother's wisdom lives on through you, Sarah. She taught you that dignity isn't about what you do for a living, but how you treat other people. That's exactly the kind of leadership this company needs." Through her tears, Sarah nodded vigorously. "Yes, sir. I promise. I promise I'll do everything I can to honor that trust and honor my mother's memory." The applause in the room grew even louder, people rising to their feet in waves. The standing ovation seemed to go on forever, a thunderous expression of joy, justice, and hope for the future. Sarah was openly sobbing now, overwhelmed by the love and support surrounding her. In that moment, she represented everything good about human nature, everything hopeful about second chances, and everything powerful about treating people with dignity and respect. The sound of that applause would echo in Daniel's memory for years to come. It was the sound of a company finding its soul again. Daniel turned back to address the room. "This company is changing, starting today. We're going to implement new policies, new training programs, new systems of accountability. But more than that, we're going to change the way we see each other, the way we treat each other, the way we define success. He picked up his father's photograph and held it so everyone could see it clearly. This picture will hang in my office from now on, not as a reminder of where I came from, but as a reminder of where we're all going. Every person in this organization matters. Every job has dignity. Every employee deserves respect. Daniel's voice softened as he concluded his speech. My father used to tell me that the measure of a person isn't how high they can climb, but how many people they lift up along the way. Today we start lifting each other up. As employees began to file out of the conference room, many stopping to shake Daniel's hand or offer words of support to Sarah, Daniel noticed Maria Gonzalez from accounting approaching hesitantly. "Mr. Greystone," she said quietly, "I just wanted to thank you. What you did, what you discovered about Mr. Thompson, it means more than you know. He made life miserable for so many of us, but we were afraid to speak up. We thought no one would believe us, or that we'd lose our jobs if we complained." Daniel's heart ached as he realized how many employees had been suffering in silence, afraid to report abuse because they felt powerless against the system. "Maria, I'm sorry. I should have known. I should have seen what was happening." "How could you have known?" Maria replied. "People like Thompson, they're careful. They only show their true faces when they think no one important is watching. That's why what you did was so brilliant. You became one of us, and you saw what we see." Over the following days, Daniel continued his transformation of the company culture, but he also continued to process the profound lessons he had learned during his month undercover. The experience had changed him in ways he was still discovering. He had learned what it felt like to be invisible, to be dismissed, to have your humanity questioned based on nothing more than the clothes you wore and the job you performed. But more importantly, he had learned to see his employees not as resources or assets or line items on a budget, but as individual human beings with hopes, fears, dreams, and struggles. He had learned their names, their stories, their challenges, and their aspirations in a way that no boardroom meeting or employee survey could ever reveal. Sarah's transition into her new role was remarkable to watch. Despite her lack of formal HR experience, she brought something to the position that couldn't be taught in any management training program: genuine empathy and an intuitive understanding of what people needed to feel valued and respected at work. Her first initiative was to implement what she called dignity rounds, where she would spend time each week working alongside employees at every level of the organization, from the executive suite to the maintenance staff. It wasn't just symbolic, it was transformative. When the VP of Human Resources was willing to empty trash cans and clean bathrooms alongside the janitorial staff, it sent a message throughout the company that no job was beneath respect. But Sarah's most important contribution was her ability to give voice to the voiceless. She created safe channels for employees to report problems, abuse, or concerns without fear of retaliation. She established mentorship programs that paired senior employees with newcomers across departmental lines. She instituted regular company-wide meetings where any employee, regardless of their position, could ask questions or raise concerns directly with leadership. The changes weren't just procedural, they were cultural. Daniel noticed it in small ways at first. Employees began greeting each other more warmly in the hallways. There was more laughter in the break rooms, more collaboration between departments, more willingness to help colleagues who were struggling. Tom, the head of security, became one of Daniel's most trusted advisors during this transition period. His 30 years of experience had given him a unique perspective on company culture, and his loyalty during the undercover investigation had proven his character. "You know what's different now, Mr. Greystone?" Tom asked during one of their regular meetings. "People aren't afraid anymore. They're not walking on eggshells, worried that they'll say the wrong thing to the wrong person and get fired. They're actually excited to come to work. Daniel smiled at this observation, but he also knew that changing culture was a marathon, not a sprint. There would be setbacks, challenges, and people who resisted the new direction. Some of Thompson's allies had already left the company, unwilling or unable to adapt to an environment where bullying and intimidation were no longer tolerated. But for every person who left, there were others who seemed to bloom in the new environment. Employees who had been quiet and withdrawn under Thompson's regime began speaking up in meetings, contributing ideas, taking on leadership roles. The company's productivity actually increased as people became more engaged and invested in their work. Daniel also made a point of staying connected to the experiences of the company's support staff. He instituted monthly lunches with the janitorial, security, and maintenance crews, not as photo opportunities or publicity stunts, but as genuine efforts to stay grounded in the perspective he had gained during his undercover month. It was during one of these lunches that he met Rosa Martinez, a night shift cleaner who had been with the company for 12 years. Rosa was a soft-spoken woman in her 50s who supported 3 grandchildren on her janitor's salary. As Daniel listened to her story, he was struck by her dignity, her work ethic, and her quiet pride in her job. "Mr. Greystone," Rosa said during their conversation, "I just want you to know how much it means to us, what you did. For so long, we felt invisible, like we didn't matter. But when you put on that uniform, when you walked in our shoes, you showed us that we do matter. You showed us that our work has value." Daniel felt tears welling up in his eyes as he listened to Rosa's words. This was exactly what his father had tried to teach him all those years ago. Every job has dignity. Every person deserves respect. Every human being matters regardless of their position on the organizational chart. "Rosa," Daniel replied, "you and your colleagues keep this building running. You create the environment where everyone else can do their jobs. Your work doesn't just have value, it's essential, and I want to make sure everyone in this company understands that." The conversation with Rosa inspired Daniel to implement another change: profit-sharing bonuses for all employees, not just executives. If the company succeeded, everyone who contributed to that success should benefit from it, whether they were VPs or janitors. But perhaps the most meaningful change was the memorial Daniel created for his father. In the main lobby of Greystone Enterprises, he installed a display featuring the photograph of Frank in his janitor's uniform, along with a plaque that read, "In memory of Frank Greystone, who taught us that true leadership is about lifting others up, and that the measure of our character is how we treat those who can do nothing for us in return." The memorial became a gathering place for employees, a reminder of the company's values and the importance of treating everyone with dignity and respect. New employees were brought to see it as part of their orientation, and the story of Frank's life and Daniel's undercover investigation became part of the company's culture and folklore. 6 months after the dramatic boardroom revelation, Daniel was reviewing quarterly reports when he noticed something remarkable. Employee retention was at an all-time high. Productivity was up significantly. Customer satisfaction scores had improved across all metrics. And perhaps most importantly, the company's reputation had transformed from an organization people warned each other about to one of the most sought-after employers in the industry. But the real measure of success wasn't in the numbers, it was in the stories. Daniel regularly received emails from employees sharing how the cultural changes had affected their lives, their families, their sense of purpose at work. One letter that particularly moved him came from Marcus Johnson, a young man in the IT department who had been struggling with depression and anxiety when Thompson was still terrorizing the staff. "Mr. Greystone," Marcus wrote, "I want you to know that your courage to become invisible probably saved my life. I was planning to quit, not just the job but everything. Thompson had made my life so miserable that I couldn't see any hope. But when you stood up to him, When you showed us that someone was watching and someone cared, it changed everything for me. I got help for my depression. I started believing in myself again. And now I look forward to coming to work every day. Thank you for seeing us when we felt invisible." Letters like Marcus's reminded Daniel that his month undercover had been about much more than exposing one toxic manager. It had been about recognizing the humanity in every person, about understanding that behind every uniform, every job title, every role in the organization, there was a human being with feelings, fears, hopes, and dreams. The Hartwell account, the presentation that had caused so much drama when Sarah's computer crashed, had been won decisively. But the victory was sweeter than any contract could ever be. But more importantly, Sarah had rebuilt the entire presentation from scratch, working alongside a team of colleagues who volunteered to help her, turning what could have been a disaster into a demonstration of the company's collaborative spirit and resilience. During the Hartwell presentation, Sarah had included a slide about Greystone Enterprises' commitment to employee dignity and respect. The clients were so impressed by the company's values and culture that they not only signed the original contract, but expanded it to include additional services. "Values aren't just words on a wall," Sarah had told the Hartwell executives. "They're lived experiences that shape how we treat each other and how we serve our clients. When you treat people with respect and dignity, when you create an environment where everyone can thrive, the results speak for themselves." As Daniel reflected on the past year, he realized that his father's dying wish had been fulfilled in ways that neither of them could have imagined. The month undercover had not only exposed problems within the company, it had transformed Daniel himself from a well-meaning but distant CEO into a leader who truly understood the experiences and needs of every person in his organization. The janitor's uniform now hung in a frame in Daniel's office, not as a costume or disguise, but as a reminder of one of the most important months of his life. The faded blue fabric, still carrying the ghost of cleaning chemicals, served as a daily reminder that leadership isn't about the authority to command others. It's about the responsibility to serve them, to protect them, to create conditions where they can flourish and contribute their best efforts. Daniel had also established an annual tradition called Invisible Week, where executives throughout the company would spend time working in different roles, from customer service to maintenance to security. It wasn't about catching people doing things wrong. It was about understanding the challenges, perspectives, and contributions of every person in the organization. The program had been so successful that other companies had begun reaching out to learn about Greystone's approach to leadership and culture. Daniel found himself speaking at business conferences, not about profit margins or market strategies, but about the transformative power of empathy, humility, and genuine respect for human dignity. But the most profound change was in Daniel himself. The experience of being invisible, of being dismissed and devalued, had fundamentally altered his understanding of power, privilege, and responsibility. He no longer saw his role as CEO as a position of authority over others, but as a position of service to others. Every morning when he arrived at the office, Daniel would stop by the memorial to his father, touching the frame of the photograph and silently renewing his commitment to the values his father had taught him. And every evening when he left, he would take one more walk through the building, not as the CEO conducting an inspection, but as someone who wanted to see his colleagues, to check in on their well-being, to make sure no one was feeling invisible or forgotten. The transformation of Greystone Enterprises became a case study taught in business schools, but for Daniel, it wasn't about business theory or management techniques. It was about something much simpler and much more profound. The recognition that every human being deserves to be treated with dignity, respect, and kindness, regardless of their job, their position, or their circumstances. Years later, when Daniel was asked to explain the secret of Greystone's success, he would always return to the same simple truth. There are no invisible people in an organization, only invisible leaders who fail to see them. When you learn to see everyone, when you understand that every person matters, that's when you discover what leadership really means. The janitor's secret had been revealed, but the real secret was much deeper. That the true measure of any organization, any leader, any human being, is not how they treat those above them in the hierarchy, but how they treat those below them, or those they perceive as having no power to help or hurt them. Frank Greystone's legacy lived on, not in the company that bore his name, but in the culture of dignity and respect that his son had created in his memory. And every day, in small acts of kindness and recognition, in policies that protected the vulnerable and elevated the forgotten, in the simple practice of seeing every person as valuable and important, that legacy continued to grow and spread. The story of the janitor who became a CEO had become the story of a CEO who learned to be human. And in that humanity, in that willingness to be invisible in order to see others more clearly, lay the secret not just of business success, but of what it means to be truly successful as a human being. In the end, Daniel realized, his father's greatest gift hadn't been a company or a fortune. It had been the wisdom to understand that we are all connected, all dependent on each other, all deserving of respect and dignity. And that wisdom, passed down from a janitor to his son, had the power to transform not just a workplace, but the world, one human interaction at a time. The janitor's uniform hanging in Daniel's office served as a daily reminder that true power lies not in the ability to make others feel small, but in the courage to make everyone feel valuable. And that lesson, learned in the most humble circumstances, had become the foundation of a legacy that would endure long after both father and son were gone. If Daniel's journey from invisible janitor to visionary leader touched your heart, please hit that like button and share this story with someone who needs a reminder that true character is revealed not by your position, but by how you treat those who can't advance your career. Drop a comment below telling us, have you ever been treated as invisible, or witnessed someone showing dignity to those others overlooked? Share your story. We want to hear it. And if you want more incredible feel-good stories about ordinary people with extraordinary courage and the power of human dignity, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Remember, there are no invisible people in this world, only those who choose not to see. Don't be one of them. See you in the next story.